Hello and welcome to today's video. Now usually whenever we think about our weight loss goals, we focus on our diet and our level of physical activity. And whilst these are really important, what we're learning a little bit more from the research is that if we aren't tackling our sleep, we may be undermining all of the other efforts that we make along our weight loss journey. So in today's video, what I'm going to cover is 1. What is the link between inadequate sleep and weight gain? 2. How can inadequate sleep undermine our efforts to lose weight? 3. How does inadequate sleep cause us to regain weight after we've managed to lose weight? And finally, I'm going to help you with a few tips to help improve your sleep if this is something that you struggle with. Here in the UK, according to surveys like this from the Royal Society of Public Health, we are increasingly squeezing our sleep duration, and most of us are not getting the amount of sleep that we should. Studies that follow up large groups of people over a number of years have found that if you chronically sleep for a short duration of time, you tend to gain weight over time. For example, this study that followed over 68,000 women for an average of 12 years found that there was a strong association between inadequate sleep and weight gain over that period. What they found was, for each hour in reduction of sleep, they had a stepwise increase in the weight that they gained over that time period. For example, after 10 years, those who typically slept 5 to 6 hours a night compared to those who slept 7 to 8 hours a night had gained an extra 9% in body weight over that 10-year period. The most striking results were in those people who had a BMI less than 25, and this is the BMI at which we categorize people as having a healthy weight for their height. Here they found that those sleeping 5 hours a night had a 58% greater likelihood of developing obesity, having a BMI more than 30, than those who slept for 7 hours a night. So why does poor sleep seem to lead to weight gain? What a lot of studies have shown is that if we don't get enough sleep, the level of our hormones that regulate our hunger are increased, and the level of hormones that make us feel satisfied from food are decreased. Over time, this means that we have a greater appetite and therefore are more likely to consume more calories and gain more weight. This small study, for example, took 10 men and women who had a BMI more than 27.4, which put them in the BMI category of having overweight. They then had them stay overnight for 10 nights at the University of Chicago. All of them were put on a calorie-restricted diet over those 10 days. But what they did was they split the group into two halves. Half the group were allowed to sleep for 8.5 hours a night, whilst the other half were allowed to sleep for only 5.5 hours a night. They took a number of measurements from them at the start of the study and at the end of the study. They then sent them home for 3 months, and after 3 months they brought them back, and the group that had been allowed to sleep for 8.5 hours a night were now allowed to sleep for only 5.5 hours a night, and the group that had originally slept for 5.5 hours each night were now allowed to sleep 8.5 hours. And this is what they found. Each time somebody had been in the sleep-deprived group, their hunger hormone ghrelin had been higher, which means that they were hungry more of the time, and also their basal metabolic rate was lower. Our basal metabolic rate is the energy it requires to just make our bodies function when we're at rest. So that includes processes such as digestion, keeping our body temperature, and all of our other cellular processes. That meant that they weren't burning as much energy at rest as they would have been if they'd had a decent night's sleep. And this is a really typical finding that's been replicated in a whole host of studies. What happens when we don't get enough sleep is that our hunger hormones are raised, our fullness hormones are lowered, and overall that means that we're more hungry, and in particular we seem to crave the kinds of foods that are less healthy for us, and over time this leads us to eat more, consume more calories, and therefore gain more weight. On average, studies seem to suggest that if we don't get enough sleep, we typically consume between 200 to 500 more calories a day compared with if we do get sufficient sleep. Another really fascinating finding of that same study was the type of weight that was lost in the well-rested group compared with the sleep-deprived group. Now bear in mind, of course, they'd all been put on a calorie-restricted diet, so they all lost weight. And in fact, both of the groups, whether they were in the sleep-deprived or the fully rested group, lost roughly the same amount of weight. What was particularly interesting was that whilst 50% of the weight lost in the well-rested group was fat, Only 20% of the weight lost in the sleep-deprived group was fat. In other words, the remainder of the weight loss, 50% in the well-rested group and a whopping 80% in the sleep-deprived group, was non-fat mass. And what that means is the weight in our body that comes from things like our water weight, our muscle weight, our organ weight. So really, probably the majority of the weight that is lost if you're sleep deprived is going to be water weight and muscle weight. And this is not the kind of weight that you're seeking to lose when you go on a weight loss journey. But don't feel despondent if, like so many of the population, you're one of these people in the sleep-deprived category, because what this study shows is that if you make intentional improvements to your sleep, you can reverse that trend really, really quickly. Here, they took 80 people who were in the overweight BMI category, who typically slept 6.5 hours or less a night, and they put them into one of two groups. The first group had 2 sessions of sleep coaching over 2 weeks to help them improve their sleep, whilst the second group had no sleep coaching and they just continued their habitual sleep pattern. They took a number of measurements that could objectively look at how many calories they ate, how much sleep they got, and how many calories they burnt per day. And they also measured their weight both at the start of the study and at the end of the study. And this is what they found. The group that had the sleep counselling had, on average, increased their sleep duration each night by about 1.2 hours. The researchers found, in fact, that for every 1 hour increase in sleep duration, the participants consumed, on average, 162 fewer calories per day. In fact, after a mere 2 weeks, whilst the sleep extended group had reduced their weight by 0.48 kilos, nearly half a kilo, the group that hadn't improved their sleep had increased their weight by 0.39 kilos over that same time period. So this study seems to show that improving your sleep can have gains really, really rapidly in helping you lose weight or maintain weight loss. Well, what if you've lost weight and you want to prevent yourself from regaining that weight? Our sleep is really, really important here too. This study included 195 adults who had obesity, and it collected a whole load of data about them, including the quality and quantity of their sleep with a wrist-worn device. They then placed them on a low-calorie diet, an 800 calorie a day diet for 2 weeks. Again, as we've seen in all of these studies, weight loss was greater in those who slept more than 6 hours a night than those who slept less than 6 hours a night. They followed them up after those 2 weeks for another 52 weeks. And they also put some of them on a weight loss drug and some on a placebo. They asked some of them to exercise, and they compared them with a group that didn't exercise. They also categorized the entire group by whether they slept less than 6 hours a night or more than 6 hours a night. And this is what they found. As we would expect, both the exercise group and the weight loss drug group managed to maintain their weight loss, whereas the group that didn't exercise and the group that weren't put on the weight loss drugs had regained some of that weight. But what was even more interesting is when they looked at the groups as a whole, those who slept more than 6 hours a night didn't regain that weight, whereas those who slept less than 6 hours a night regained a lot of the weight that they had lost. In fact, they regained about 5.3 kilos over the following 52 weeks if they slept less than 6 hours a night. So in summary, don't let poor sleep undermine your weight loss efforts. Inadequate sleep makes us more hungry, it lowers our metabolic rate, it makes us crave more unhealthy foods, and it even makes us lose muscle mass and water weight rather than fat mass. What's more, we're more likely to regain the weight we've lost if we don't get adequate sleep. I've also made a separate video just generally explain how we sleep, why we sleep, factors that affect our sleep. And at the end, there are some tips on how to improve your sleep. So please have a look at that video too. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much.